Today we witness the ultimate fall of Rome. The terrifying truth is far worse than the ancient myths. We picture savage hordes breaking down the city gates, reducing the grand capital to ash in massive wars. What if I told you Rome never fell to outside foes? It was entirely destroyed by the hands of its own people. The fatal ruin was a silent sickness from within, a toxic mix of greed and deep political corruption. Witness how the most powerful nation simply rotted away. Let us uncover the terrifying truth together. For many centuries, the Roman Empire stood as the undisputed master of the ancient Western world. Its massive borders stretched endlessly from the cold mists of Britain to the scorching African dunes. This enormous scale created a powerful illusion of strength that blinded the emperors and citizens. But behind the glorious marble columns and golden eagles lay a deeply fractured and unstable core. Many scholars argue that the great empire died from 1,000 cuts rather than a single fatal blow. By the early 5th century, the magnificent capital was no longer the proud center of the world. A depressing silence slowly wrapped around the giant forums where victorious generals once paraded. The beautiful stone roads that connected the civilized world began to crack and fill with unwanted weeds. Giant marble statues representing the legendary ancient gods were neglected to gather thick dust. The citizens walking under these structures looked exhausted by the heavy weight of their daily lives. They were not bleeding from external battles, but from the constant struggle to survive another harsh day. The proud Roman identity that once conquered the sea was slowly dissolving into a sea of despair. Their leaders in the Senate cared far more about preserving personal luxury than saving the state. They hosted lavish banquets behind highly guarded walls, while the common people starved in filthy streets. This massive gap between the rich and poor created a toxic world, where national loyalty vanished. Rome was effectively acting like a giant tree that looked strong outside, but was hollow on the inside. The roots of the state were infected with a terrible disease that no military general could cure. Taxes were raised to impossible levels just to fund the extravagant lifestyles of the ruling class. Honest merchants and hard-working farmers were crushed entirely by the demands of greedy tax collectors. Many desperate people voluntarily sold themselves into slavery just to escape the heavy state taxes. The justice system became a tragic joke, where favorable verdicts were openly bought and sold for gold. The famous Roman law that once brought order to the chaotic world was a tool to oppress the weak. Every single institution that made the empire function was poisoned by endless bribery and greed. The great Colossus of Rome was still standing tall, but its heavy stone feet were crumbling into dust. It was only a matter of time before the structure failed completely and brought the system crashing down. There was no sudden, shocking moment of destruction, but a painful and agonizing slide into darkness. The once mighty eagle standard of the legions was covered in mud and carried by men with no pride. Even the weather seemed to mourn the dying empire, as gray clouds constantly blocked the hopeful sunlight. The magnificent fountains that used to supply clean water to the millions were running completely dry. This was a society that had essentially lost its soul and its core purpose in the ancient world. The illusion of greatness was finally shattered as the stark reality of extreme poverty grew. Every corner of the eternal city whispered the undeniable truth that the end was approaching fast. No amount of fine marble could cover up the stench of a political system decaying from the top. The citizens were trapped inside a sinking ship, while their captains ignored the massive holes in the hull. If you were living in this decaying city, would you stay to defend it, or run away to the wild lands? The first major organ to completely fail in this sick imperial body was the fragile economy. Desperate to pay their massive debts, the corrupt emperors ordered the state mints to dilute the silver coins. They mixed cheap base metals into the currency, creating millions of ugly coins that held zero value. This blind and foolish financial strategy triggered a catastrophic wave of hyperinflation everywhere. The basic price of wheat and bread skyrocketed so high that ordinary citizens could not buy food. Greedy officials hoarded pure silver, while desperate peasants held worthless pieces of rusted copper. Basic trade and commerce collapsed entirely because nobody trusted the imperial currency to last. Once bustling markets turned into desolate and empty squares, where starving families begged for leftover scraps. The economic disaster was followed by a terrifying enemy that no sword could ever defeat. A series of horrifying biological plagues swept through the dense and unsanitary cities of Rome. Historical texts describe terrifying symptoms, as millions suffered from terrible fevers and lesions. The invisible killer moved silently through the crowded streets, leaving countless victims in the muddy alleys. There was simply not enough healthy people left alive to properly bury the tragic fallen victims. The massive loss of human life created a deadly chain reaction that crippled the agricultural spine. Vast stretches of farmland were completely abandoned because there were no peasants left to harvest the crops. Without enough food production, the great cities faced extreme starvation, and the state lost its tax revenue. The mighty military machine that protected the vast borders suddenly lacked money and healthy young men. The native Roman population was too sick and too tired to pick up heavy iron shields and march to war. Faced with empty barracks and looming threats, the desperate leaders made a decision that sealed their fate. They opened the borders and actively hired thousands of fierce barbarian warriors from the Germanic tribes. These foreign mercenaries were physically huge and incredibly brutal, contrasting the weak Roman elite. They marched into the imperial camps wearing thick animal pelts and carrying highly effective iron arms. Rome was now entirely dependent on the very same people they used to conquer in their glorious past. The tragic irony was that the survival of the Eternal City rested completely in outsider hands. However, true loyalty to the empire could no longer be inspired by shared cultural values or pride. The barbarian mercenaries fought strictly for money, and they expected to be paid well for their service. But when the state treasury ran completely dry, they were handed bags of the diluted and worthless copper. These tough warriors quickly realized that their supposed masters were actually cowards hiding behind walls. They looked at the trembling Roman aristocrats with deep contempt and realized they held the real power now. The mercenaries began to demand lands and high political titles, refusing to remain mere state tools. Mutinies and rebellions became extremely common as the hired swords turned against the generals who failed. The protective shield of Rome had officially transformed into a deadly sword, pointed at its own throat. Military camps became hotbeds of tension, where barbarian leaders plotted to take what they deserve. They saw the rich estates of the cowardly nobles and knew that nobody could stop them from taking all. The cancer had metastasized, affecting the economy the population, and destroying the military core. The empire was no longer a functioning state, but merely a hollow shell, waiting for someone to crush it. The gods had officially become the masters, and the ancient rulers were reduced to pathetic hostages. A dark and terrifying new reality settled over the western provinces as chaos replaced Roman order. The glorious civilization that built massive colosseums was drowning in its own terrible mismanagement. There was no escape from the consequences of centuries of corruption, and the final reckoning was here. As the massive crisis deepened across the land, a desperate solution was quickly proposed by the elite. The frightened leaders decided to completely slice the dying empire into two entirely equal halves. It was a brutal political surgery, designed to save the healthy organs by cutting off the terrible rot. The Eastern Roman Empire secured the wealth and the vital trade routes for its own selfish survival. It turned its back on the ancient homeland, abandoning the West to face the dark and deadly doom. Rome, the sacred mother city, was left isolated, poor, and defenseless against the coming furious storm. The western palaces became incredibly cold and empty, as the cowardly aristocrats simply ran away. They packed their golden treasures and fled to safer lands, leaving the starving commoners far behind them. Without a strong central authority, the hired foreign mercenaries finally stepped into the power vacuum. They walked freely through the silent halls, admiring the crumbling marble and the faded purple royal silk. The foreign soldiers realized that no Roman general was brave enough to stop them from ruling the land now. They rested their muddy leather boots on the beautiful ancient tables of the wealthy and proud senators. The hired gods were drinking stolen expensive wine from the dirty and tarnished gold and silver goblets. The few remaining Roman officials trembled in deep fear whenever the massive warriors walked right past them. These corrupt men clutched their cheap jewelry, praying silently that their weak and pathetic lives would be saved. The mercenaries were not interested in mindless violence. They wanted absolute control over everything. They began to dictate policies, making the weak emperors nothing but helpless and incredibly sad puppets. The Western army was now composed entirely of mighty men who did not speak the ancient Latin tongue. They held no respect for the sacred traditions that originally built the mighty Western civilization. Internal rot had consumed the state entirely, leaving only the fragile illusion of a working empire. Corruption and dark dependence had finally reached the very fragile heart of the famous eternal city. Every pillar of the society was terribly broken, and the once mighty eagle was too weak to fly. The roads that once echoed with the marching of victorious legions were now silent and deeply depressed. A heavy shadow of inevitable approaching doom settled firmly over the muddy ruins of the capital. The stage was perfectly set for the final tragic act of a drama that lasted for many long centuries. The collapse would not come from a massive invasion, but from a quiet and simple, sudden shift of power. The remaining Roman citizens were completely exhausted, too hungry and sick to care about who ruled them. They watched with hollow eyes as their glorious ancient world faded quickly into the dark and freezing abyss. The division of the empire was a desperate political gamble that ultimately doomed the Western lands. It proved that the political elite cared absolutely nothing for the survival of their own starving people. They sacrificed the sacred motherland just to successfully protect their own comfortable and wealthy lifestyles. This extreme and brutal selfishness was the final deadly symptom of the disease that killed the Roman state. The foreign mercenaries were merely the undertakers, arriving to bury a state that was already dead. A state built on endless, violent conquest finally collapsed completely under its own massive, heavy weight. The historical stage is perfectly ready for the infamous year of 476 AD. The final end of the Western Roman Empire arrived in a remarkably quiet and pathetic, tragic way. Inside the dim and freezing palace walls, a terrifying silence replaced the usual noble royal guards. Sitting on a massively oversized golden throne was a terrified teenage boy named Romulus Augustulus. The last emperor of the Western world was just a pale, frail, and incredibly frightened little helpless child. He wore an oversized faded purple robe, heavily stained with the dirt of his utterly dying kingdom. His trembling, pale hands could barely support the heavy and tarnished golden imperial crown upon his small head. Approaching the ancient marble throne was Odoacer, the ruthless and incredibly powerful mercenary. The battle-scarred barbarian warrior cast a long and extremely dark shadow over the trembling young boy. Odoacer did not even bother to draw his chipped iron sword from its heavy and dirty leather sheath. There was no epic final duel, no heroic last stand, and truly, no shedding of any royal crimson blood. The towering general looked at the weeping child emperor with a cold and absolute, deep, silent contempt. He simply reached out his rough hand and casually took the massive crown from the crying boy's weak, frail grasp. Romulus offered absolutely no physical resistance, giving up the glorious empire with a quiet sob. The giant marble colossus of Rome finally shattered into thousands of broken pieces in the filthy mud. A proud civilization of 1,000 years was dismantled in mere seconds without a single bloody fight. Odoacer did not claim the imperial title, realizing the Western throne was completely worthless to him. He simply packed up the royal symbols and safely shipped them away to the powerful emperor in the east. It was a clear political message, declaring that the Western Roman Empire had finally ceased to exist. The empire did not die in a blaze of glorious fire. It whimpered into the very dark historical night. Its fall was the natural result of the terminal cancer of corruption, selfish greed, and blind, arrogant pride. When a state destroys its own economy and betrays its working citizens, it writes its own tragic, dark doom. When leaders hire mercenaries because their people are too sick to fight, the bitter and absolute end is near. Rome thought its massive stone walls and legacy would protect it from the natural consequences of its deep sins. But no amount of beautiful stone can support a society that has completely lost its deep moral foundation. The fall of Rome is a chilling and incredibly timeless warning for all the mighty modern empires today. True strength does not come from endless war spending or the massive physical size of the nation's distant borders. It comes from the health, the strong unity, and the real prosperity of the everyday working citizens. If the inner core rots entirely away, the magnificent outer shell will eventually crumble into dust. The ghosts of the eternal city whisper this harsh truth through the broken stones of the ancient and dark ruins. Will we clearly listen to this historical lesson, or will we repeat the very same deadly, tragic mistakes? The final fall of Rome proves that no superpower is truly immortal when facing deep internal corruption. The worst enemy of a highly powerful nation is the dark reflection in its very own shattered glass mirror. Rome ultimately fell to ruin because it entirely forgot the very core values that originally made it great. Do you think the collapse was truly inevitable? Or could a strong leader have magically saved the dying empire? If you enjoyed this dark historical journey, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more.